After Persona 5 took the internet by storm on the PlayStation 3 and 4 over 5 years ago, the improved Royal version, released a few years later, has finally gone multiplat, getting a brand new release on pretty much everything, including Xbox, PC, and even Nintendo Switch. So, how does this iconic adventure about rebelling against a corrupt society hold up on the portable platform? Let's find out in GameXplain's review of Persona 5 Royal on the Nintendo Switch. As with the original release, Persona 5 Royal is essentially the definitive edition version of Persona 5, with additional characters, story changes and additions, new gameplay mechanics, and tons of extra DLC goodies, like costumes and challenge battles. And all of that is still true in the multi-platform version, except this time all of the DLC is included at no extra cost, making for an even better value than before. Just be aware that, because you get all of the DLC at once, which includes over 40 costumes, extra healing items, a ton of in-game money, and access to special personas that are very high leveled, it can make the early game a little easier than originally intended. It's not a big deal, as you can just redeem the DLC later instead, but it's an easy mistake to make if it's your first time playing and would prefer the extra challenge. That possible side effect aside, it's great that all of Royal's DLC is included here at no additional cost, and it helps the multi-platform release feel like the true definitive edition of Persona 5 Royal, and also helps justify the wait. But beyond the advertised feature of DLC available right out of the box, there are no other changes or additions, as far as I can tell at least. It's remarkably faithful to the original 2020 release of the game, and that's totally okay. While it could have used a few quality of life improvements in some areas, there's nothing egregious that takes away from the game in need of an update. Given that the original release of Persona 5 was a few console generations ago, I didn't expect any significant problems running on the Nintendo Switch, and for the most part, that's exactly the case. Alright, that's perhaps a bit of an understatement, as I was surprised by just how good this game looks on the Switch. Loading times are still quick, I haven't noticed any slowdown, and the art style keeps this game looking stylish even several years later. The game even runs just as well in handheld mode. With earlier Persona games best enjoyed in their handheld releases, there's just something special about getting to play Persona 5 in handheld mode as well. It fits nicely on the small screen, and I've put a ton of time into it this way. That being said, the presentation isn't perfect, as there are some issues with animated textures and shaders. The door to safe rooms, red distortions on shadows and personas, and even the glowing, foggy treasures at the end of palaces all animate at noticeably low frame rates. And while there's smaller instances that don't really take away from the game as a whole, it's hard to ignore once you notice them, so sorry about that. That being said, considering the rest of the game otherwise runs exceptionally well on the Switch, that small sacrifice was clearly worth it. It runs smoothly, both docked and handheld, and has been an absolute joy to play on my Switch. So, now that we've established it's a competent port, let's get to the actual game itself, and why it's so beloved by RPG fans. And that starts with a compelling plot. The story grips you right away, throwing the player into the middle of a heist amidst the Phantom Thieves, before getting caught in the act, leading into everything up to that point getting told through flashback. It's an engaging introduction that not only establishes the dangerous situation that the protagonist is in, but also sets the expectations for just how grand this adventure will get by teasing this major moment. It slows down from there, dedicating much of the first arc of the game to easing the player into this world. Well, worlds. The world of being a transfer student to Shujin Academy, living your day-to-day life meeting people, making friends, and being an honest student, and the world of the metaverse, training to become a phantom thief by stealing treasures, summoning personas, and battling monsters called shadows. If you're familiar with the series at all, then you know that this balance of two worlds is really what makes these RPGs so long. But the storytelling here in Persona 5 is phenomenal. I adore this cast of characters, and found myself invested in their struggles and the overall world building. It's a story about finding yourself, and rebelling against a corrupt society, finding what you believe is the right thing to do, and sticking to it. But like many other Persona games, it's also about strengthening the bond you have with your friends and those close to you, understanding how to help those around you. Seriously, this game hits upon some really heavy topics, especially right at the start. Uncomfortably heavy topics at times. But many of these are handled very well through the storytelling, and it keeps you gripped at the edge of your seat. Most of the time, at least. There's some particular moments late in the game that really slow the pacing of the storytelling for a bit. It feels a bit better in Royal over the original Persona 5, but some of the original issues are still there. That being said, Royal does address some of the original issues from Persona 5, such as some of the plot holes. If you've only played the original Persona 5 and not the previous release of Persona 5 Royal, you're missing out on some big story additions. Royal adds 2 major characters to the game, as well as an entire new epilogue story. It's an expansive addition to the original Persona 5, akin to Persona 4 Golden's improvements compared to the original. Though the story isn't perfect all the way through, it's still one of my favorites, and playing through it yet again here has only reiterated that to me. The cast of characters, natural way of choosing who you spend your time with, and your friendship with your teammates growing as the story progresses makes for a wonderful story. The gameplay to Persona 5 Royal can be broken down into 2 halves, just like the worlds of this game. The overworld, be it in Tokyo or the metaverse, where the player roams around the world, and battles, where the player uses personas to engage in combat with enemies. It's a pretty standard breakdown as far as turn-based RPGs go, so fans of the genre should find it very familiar. Despite being a turn-based RPG, players are likely to spend the majority of their time in the overworld. When roaming around Tokyo, it's not all about plot progression. Every day on the calendar is another day where something happens. Sometimes it's plot related, but other times it's up to the player to decide. Strengthen your bonds with your friends and confidants by spending time with them to get better rewards, go shopping for various items and supplies to increase your options in battle, or work on improving your social stats, such as by studying to increase your knowledge, or cleaning the store to boost your kindness. There's a lot to do on a daily basis in this game, and if you don't keep up with the different options, it can get overwhelming. So it's important to strategize and manage your time in this game, especially when there's a deadline. If you need to complete certain tasks before a deadline in-game, you better make sure to manage your time well. There's more than just exploring Tokyo, as there's also the metaverse, the cognitive world where shadows lurk. Whether it's a palace or mementos, these are expansive dungeons that the player must navigate through while solving puzzles and battling enemies. These are always faster and flashier than walking through the crowded city at a slower pace. Time doesn't move in these dungeons, so you can stay in them for long periods of time, progressing to the palace, or just fighting a bunch of enemies. While the general overworld gameplay is slower paced, especially out in Tokyo, it is an absolute joy to go through. Strategizing your best use of time to maximize your earnings and progression is interesting, not to mention rewarding. Especially since so much of what you do will directly impact how you or your party members perform in battle, so it's important to keep up with it all. And the palaces in the metaverse are well designed, keeping you engaged as you explore through them. There's one other element to the overworld gameplay we haven't touched upon yet, because it ties heavily into battles, personas. Whether you're in Tokyo or the metaverse, you can access the Velvet Room, where you can access your personas. You can change out the ones on your team, or power them up by fusing them together, and more. They can even get stronger based on your bonds with your different confidants. It's an important part of the game that helps your personas perform better in battle as they too grow in level. And there are a lot of personas. So on top of building your team of Phantom Thief allies, you're also structuring your accessible arsenal of personas. And then there are the battles. Battles see your protagonist and 3 party members grouped together to take out a series of enemies, each taking turns to attack. Your team can use physical attacks using their carried weapon, pull out a gun to fire at enemies, or summon their persona to use special moves. These can be different elemental attacks, healing abilities, and more. There's a lot of options. And when enemies have their own weaknesses for you to find, it's all a big game of strategizing to get the best outcome. Not only winning the fight, but preserving your resources along the way as well. Targeting enemy weaknesses can trigger a holdup, where you can persuade an enemy to become one of your personas, demand an item or money from it, or just take them all out in a flashy, stylish move called an all-out attack. These are always satisfying, and I never get tired of them. Watching the Phantom Thieves strike all across the screen, followed by a party member's personalized finisher screen, it puts a smile on my face every time. There's even flashier finisher moves you can get, called showtimes, which involve two party members teaming up to take out an enemy together in a whole sequence of events. They're all a ton of fun, though I wish each character had more than two pairings. I would have loved to see more of these get added to the multi-platform release of the game, showing even more of the party turning their interactions into a flashy combo attack. But that just really speaks to how good the gameplay feels. I constantly want more, and that's at least partially thanks to the game's impeccable presentation. The art style and visuals are just as striking as ever, even if they may not be as crisp on the Switch compared to some other platforms. The colors are bright and vivid, which help make all the visual effects of battle even more satisfying to see. The 2D character art used for dialogue are very expressive, and there's a good variety of them for each character too. And don't even get me started on the UI. The menus and UI of Persona 5 have been long celebrated, and for good reason. It's incredibly stylized, not to mention satisfying with its animations too. That knife thrown into the calendar to change the date? Ooh, something about it gets me every time. Plus, most of the menus present all of the necessary information in a mostly easy to access way. Though this was where I was hoping for some improvement. Despite most information being easy to access, there are still some menus that are a bit too nested to find at times, such as your social stats, where if you want to find out how close to leveling up you are, you still need to go think in the bathroom. Given that this is a port of Persona 5 Royal to various platforms, I was hoping we'd see some changes to a few menus like this, with some sort of quality of life improvements. Some way to see progress on these social stats in the menu would have been nice, rather than only really being able to do so from the bathrooms. But I guess that's just part of the slower paced, patient gameplay of the overworld portions, living your life as a student. Finally, the soundtrack is incredible. Beneath the Mask has always been a favorite of mine, but it feels great to be hearing the song in another playthrough of the game again. And that's not even to mention the other exciting and iconic themes, like Last Surprise or Life Will Change. It's not all vocal themes, of course, as Willpower and Blooming Villain will always be some of my favorite video game boss themes. Seriously, the music in Persona 5 is great, and if you play in Switch handheld mode, you better have those headphones ready. Don't you dare play this game muted. Persona 5 Royal shattered expectations when it originally released a couple of years ago, taking a game that many already hailed as a masterpiece and making it even better. With all of the incredible additions made to Royal, including its added characters, story, mechanics, and more, all of the original DLC included, and the fact that it runs superbly on the Nintendo Switch, minus that small texture issue, I can confidently say that I loved Persona 5 Royal on the platform. It's been an absolute blast revisiting one of my favorite games on my favorite platform, and I can't stop smiling over how well it feels too. I used to be worried that fans holding out for the day to play Persona 5 for the first time on their Switch would be disappointed, but those worries are long gone. If you haven't played Persona 5 before, I implore you to give it a try this time around. With that, thank you all for watching our review of Persona 5 Royal on the Nintendo Switch. How do you feel about Persona 5 finally coming to the Switch? Will you be picking this one up, or play on a different platform? Let us know in the comments below, and stay tuned to GameXplain for plenty more news, reviews, and more on gaming. Until next time, farewell everyone.